Hello everyone, welcome to Multivariate Statistics and Machine Learning. In this video I will be talking about principal components analysis as opposed to principal components whitening that we have discussed before. If you'd like to study this yourself, check out the section 2.5 and also 2.6 in the lecture notes. So I've been talking a lot about PCA core and PC and whitening, and so now let's talk about PCA itself. So PCA means principal components analysis. And the principal components, as we will see, are related to the latent variables that we've seen in PCA whitening. So related, but not the same as PCA whitening or PCA core whitening. So how is it defined? So PCA works as follows. So there's a PCA transformation so we have our X, and then the X has a variance that is sigma, and sigma is decomposed into U lambda U transpose. So that's just the eigenvalue decomposition. And now the PCA transformation is simply U transpose times X, and that's our principal components. So these are the principal components. So they are just transformed variables. So we start with a random variable x, vector x, and then it's another random vector. And the components of this transformed random vector are the principal components. So what is the interesting thing now? And the interesting thing is the variance of this principal component vector is easy to show that this variance, because it's the variance of U transpose X, and that's U transpose sigma U, and that's lambda. So the variance of the principal components is actually the matrix of eigenvalues, which means immediately the principal components are orthogonal but not orthonormal. So the variance is not one of the individual components, so it's not whitened. So if we recall, so PCA whitening was that we have Z times the whitening matrix was PCA times X, and that's actually just let me, it's lambda minus 1/2 times U transpose X. So that's PCA whitening. So the difference here is that PCA whitening standardizes, so this is the difference. So make variance equal to 1. So we divide by the variance. The variance is given by the eigenvalues. So this is the only difference. So PCA widening does exactly the same as PCA. PCA widening is basically standardized PCA. Well, standardized means the variance of the PCA components is made to 1. But all the other optimality properties are the same. So PCA and PCA widening share same optimality, and in particular they're both concerned about compression. The only thing that really differs is whether the latent components are rescaled to 1 or not. So that's it basically. So PCA is an unstandardized version of PCA widening. In practice, PCA is actually usually formulated in terms of data. So when you have not in random variables, so data. So we have a matrix T, and that's X, so our data matrix, times U. So that's the matrix notation. So data matrix notation, and you can see the order here is reversed because in the statistics data convention the samples are in the rows and the variables are in the columns, which is why the U is basically transposed the whole thing. So that's really all about PCA. So the thing that's new in PCA is that you have some visualization coming along with PCA usually, and I would like to talk about this. And one thing is called the correlation loading plot. So loading plot, and this correlation loading plot, that's actually quite useful, and that works for both. I'll show you an example in a minute. Works for both PCA and PCA widening, because it's essentially the same apart from the standardization. So the key thing is we look into the cross correlations. So psi, so if we recall, psi is the correlation between each zi and the xi. So that's our correlation matrix. So it's relatively easy to show that we can do the same thing with the t, with the standardized t, or the non-standardized t, and because the standardization doesn't really matter, the psi is the same whether you use zi or ti. So this is actually the same as the correlation between the ti and the xi. So this is using PCA components, and this is using the PCA widened components. So this is actually exactly the same. And the interesting thing is now that this psi, so if you think about some sort of a regression, so we have our principal components or the whitened components. So these are the ti or the zi, and then on the other hand we have the original random variable, the xi. So this psi gives us the correlation between each ti and one of the xi. So we can basically link the latent variable with the original variables. So, but in particular we can do the following. So let's write it out. We can have t1, t2, td, and they all link up with x1. So what does this say? So the thing is, since the ti are uncorrelated, the squared correlations give a measure of variable importance. So squared correlations indicate variable importance of ti for x1. So we can figure out which of these actually are important simply because they're uncorrelated, and the sum of those actually add up to 1, some of those squared correlations. So in practice now, because of the compression thing, so because of the compression property, of PCA or PCA whitening, often only the first few components are relevant. And in particular relevant, and in particular often only the first two are relevant. So what we do is we plot the correlations. So the idea, plot correlations of first two PCAs. So Z1, Z2, or T1, T2, with all original variables. And then you get something like this. So we have correlation of Z1 with xi, and we have correlation of Z2 with xi, and then we can just put them into a nice circle because we can use them here. So we have Z1 or T1, or here Z1 or T1, so it doesn't really matter whether you use T1 or Z1. And then for each data point we have a number, so this number goes from -1 to 1, of course, and here the same. So this goes from -1, 1, 1, and then we can, because of the nature that the sum of those squared correlations never go above 1, we find that they all lie in a circle. So we can draw a nice plot. So we have, for instance, we have one original variable, let's say blood pressure, that has a strong correlation with Z1, but lowers, there must be 2 here, strong with Z1 but lower with Z2, and then we have one with lower correlation with Z1 but high correlation with Z2. So this way we can at least try to interpret the PCs, so the principal components. So for ZCA writing we didn't have this problem because we try to keep them interpretable. For PCA you never know what the principal components are actually doing, but using these kind of plots you can try to figure out what PCA is actually doing. So let me give you a printed example from the manuscript. So what you see here, so there's some data set called iris data, which is a flower data set. So you will do this actually in the example sheet. So this is a scatter plot of the PCAs. So you have 3 groups, and you can see that in PCA, if you plot the first PCA components, often you can see also that there's some clustering that you can recognize. So in this case you can recognize that there may be a group here that is clustering and so on. So the plot that I wanted to show you is actually this plot. So this is the correlation loadings plot. So it's kind of, here we go, the correlation loadings plot, and you can see here that we have here these two, we have the 2 correlations and Z1, 2 principal components, Z1 and Z2, and we have 4 variables in this case, and we can clearly see that some of the, for instance, petal width and petal height is strongly linked mainly with the first principal components, whereas sepal width is actually more linked with the second principal component. So this allows us to interpret the latent variables. So the last thing I would like to show is this plot here. So in PCA you have variances, and what you can do, you can plot the variances because of the variables are independent, so the variances actually of the individual variables also sum up to the total variation, just like in a regression when you have no uncorrelated predictors. So what you can do, you can basically see how much variation you have in the first component, how much you have in the second component, and so on. Of course, this is simply proportional to the cumulative sum of the eigenvalues. And sometimes these plots are actually used to figure out how many principal components you would like to keep. Because principal components, because it has this compression property, allows you actually to throw away the low or lesser important components. So you're not really looking into a one-to-one transformation, but you can actually get rid of some of the lower ranking components. So you can try to condense all the information that you have in, let's say, 10 or 20 predictors or original variables into a smaller dimensional set of latent variables. Okay, so that's all I would like to say today about principal components analysis. In the worksheets you find examples and also example analysis. So we will have at least one complete worksheet that is just devoted to PCA. So and you can try to do some practical stuff in R with PCA. Okay, that's it for today, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.